So we're getting into the stage of the election campaign, as we do every 3 years, where people start taking a closer look at the commitments and spending promises of the various parties in the last 2 or 3 weeks before the election. And I've had some concerns in terms of the numbers that the Labor Party have been putting together over the last couple of weeks. And we've been doing some analysis in this office and in the National Party, and we believe that there's a significant hole in Labor's fiscal numbers. And that hole is of the order of $11.7 billion as a result of 4 errors and then a follow-on 5th matter in relation to finance costs. The spending numbers were already high, significantly higher than was provided for in the pre-election fiscal update, and these changes make it significantly higher again. As I say, there's 5 items that we think need to be addressed, and we've re-presented the numbers with those items corrected. Firstly, a failure to roll out the operating allowances which they've nominated for each year into subsequent years, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Secondly, a failure to allow for any increase in paid parental leave in their families package, despite saying it is included. Thirdly, counting additional multinational tax revenue when Treasury has already counted it in the pre-election fiscal update. Fourthly, only including the cost of their family package from 1 July 2018, when they said clearly it will begin on 1 April 2018, and then further finance costs associated with the extra borrowing that's required. The most substantial error is the error in operating allowances. And the way to think about operating allowances is an example of if you pay increased salaries for police out of an operating allowance for a year, that then must continue in subsequent years. So the operating allowance is set up that the expenditure flows through subsequent years. And I refer you to the budget summary of initiatives where it has a clear explanation of that. In this situation, those operating allowances which Labor would nominate don't flow through into subsequent years. So they're in effect only one-off items of expenditure. And that means one of 2 things. Either they don't have any capacity beyond the announcements they've already made for any spending beyond the current financial year, or they've made a significant error in rolling out those allowances. And it is a significant error because if you take the view that they don't need those allowances, then in effect there's no money for police wages increases, there's no money for even normal teacher wages and role growth increases, no money for areas like justice or the conservation department or any other government department, and no money set aside for one-offs that you get in government such as pay equity settlements and the like. So in effect, and that's completely not an untenable situation. No government gets through 2 or 3 years without any additional expenditure. So that's the issue with these particular allowances. So if you correct those plans, and that's what we've done, we haven't added anything else in beyond what we've said there, then in effect the increased expenditure goes up by $11.7 billion, and given the absence yet anyway of the increased taxes, that means the debt increases by $20 billion over the next 4 years instead of the $7 billion that they have previously admitted to. That's a very significant increase in debt. That is increasing New Zealand's net crown debt by 1/3 over 4 years, at the very time when we should be reducing debt at this stage of the economic cycle. It also breaks their own budget responsibility pledges because it means that debt to GDP doesn't get below 23.5% as against their stated commitment to get it down below 20% of GDP. It also breaks the pledge around sustainable operating allowances because as a result of the correction of these areas, the operating allowances, the overgoal surpluses, I should say, reduced below $2 billion in the out year. So it's a significant change. I think they've got significant questions to answer. From the National Party's perspective, we have kept well within the pre-election fiscal update numbers. There's a separate summary which has been circulated previously on the commitments that we've made, and they fit well within the current operating allowance for budget 2018 of 1.7 billion annually. But I think these numbers need to be critiqued pretty seriously, because it is a very big hole and a very significant increase in expenditure compared to what's being positioned in the public domain at the moment. So I also have a couple of graphs here which you've seen in the documentation. One that looks at the debt track, the corrective debt track, and national debt track, and then also the operating allowances versus new spending between the two parties are also shown in those graphs. So, happy to take any questions.
How basic an error is failing to roll out the operating expenditure?
What's this, right?
How basic an error is it? I mean, is it finance 101?
It's a pretty basic error. When we first found it, we were surprised, and we checked it a number of times. We've been into the back of the numbers to find out whether it had sort of been parked anywhere else, but it hasn't been. So it is. It's a very sort of straightforward error from a finance perspective.
Wasn't it signed off by a reputable, economist?
Well, I think in Bill's defence, they probably signed off on the addition of the numbers and the way that the numbers flowed through to the balance sheet. But what they wouldn't have done, I doubt anyway, would have been making their own decisions on the initiatives that Labor included or didn't include. I'm assuming that would be up to Labor. We can debate about whether they should have picked up the operating allowance. I would have thought that would have been something they might have observed, but they don't seem to have.
They don't have a treasury secondee, or they haven't had it for some
Yes, I
time.
believe they do actually. I have heard, I don't have a strong view on it, but we certainly haven't used a treasury secondee to critique the figures. These are not very difficult things to do if you know your way around the government accounts.
So are you absolutely certain that they haven't included that?
Yes, I'm certain that they haven't included that. There's only two explanations for what they've done. Either they've decided that they don't need any expenditure outside, for the next two budgets beyond what they've already allowed for in the current year, and beyond their commitments in health and education, which is just literally untenable, or they have made this mistake. To give you an example of it, our non-education, non-health extra spending in this budget just completed was around $900 million to $1 billion each year, so that's a sort of $4 billion out over 4 years. So it's a pretty straightforward issue. You either have the money there or you don't. They don't have it there.
So couldn't they argue, though, that they would control the spending year after year and that it doesn't just accumulate?
Well, that would be a very heroic and brave argument to try and make, because actually you've got to always add expenditure. It's about the rate of growth of expenditure. And to suggest that somehow they'd be able to hold every other department to nil beyond health and education and a couple of small things that they've got listed. Don't forget, we're in the middle of rolling out the Ministry of Vulnerable Children, for example, where significant extra expenditure has been made and will need to be made. That's why you have an allowance, and that's why they would have put the allowance in there, to be for those sort of things. They didn't have to go and write the whole budget now. Their problem is that they haven't allowed for that allowance to continue. They've treated it as if each year is a one-off.
Who's done all the work on this?
It's been done by staff in my office and in the National Party.
No government officials?
No government officials.
So just explain that, say the
The
vulnerable,
dab hand with a spreadsheet itself.
the vulnerable children increases in this budget, you would have set out increases for 4 years running, wouldn't
That's
you?
correct. And there are more increases ahead, because as we know, it's at the beginning stages of this, and we've been quite open. And so has the Labor Party been quite open. We need to invest more in this area, and that would come out of the operating allowance in the years ahead. And that's what we've done. We've set up an operating allowance. If you look at the pre-election fiscal update, there's an operating allowance of $1.7 billion a year, and that rolls out over subsequent years through the budgets, and then that gets allocated for a pressure like the Ministry of Vulnerable Children. or for police salaries, or for teacher salaries and role growth, or for investments in IT for different agencies. There's a myriad of things that come up every year that have to have money spent on them, and it suggests that every vote beyond these ones here that Labor have listed out as initiatives is going to be nil. Just defies any form of belief.
So,
But isn't Audrey's question the right question? Surely those increases are already factored into the fiscal numbers that the Treasury's produced.
Only to the extent that that funding has been appropriated. So in the case of the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, we're at the first stage of probably what will be a 2 or 3 stage investment over the subsequent years. There is more money required to be appropriated for the Ministry for Vulnerable Children in the next financial year, once the full program for investment for that ministry is developed, which is being developed at the moment.
has National produced a full list of its policy plans to match with Labor's?
Yes.
Or is that the prefix?
No, well, the preview is the basis for it, which of course, as we know, is the 142-page document. Our own policy announcements and how they fit within the preview has been released. It was released last week, and we've actually updated it for you to take away today. You can have it there. It's literally, doing this slightly from memory, but it's a commitments of an operating of around 300 million a year, out of the operating allowance of 1.7 in budget 18.
So assuming you're correct in this and Labour go on to be elected into government, what would this mean for taxpayers? What would be the
Will
alternative?
mean a very significant increase in expenditure beyond what they've told taxpayers to this point. Significant build-up of debt from, as I say, 60 billion a year. 60 billion now to $80 billion. They're about $79 billion. And that can only flow through over time to increased interest rates because of the higher debt profile of New Zealand. That's the real deal.
What do you think this could potentially do to New Zealand's credit rating?
Well, it could have an impact on it. That'll be a matter for the credit rating agencies. But I know that one of the things that they are very supportive of is the fact that our fiscal consolidation, in other words, our plan to bring debt down, particularly as a percentage of GDP, is something they place positive store by. And that's partly because private debt is still quite high. And so the government reducing its debt gives the ratings agencies confidence.
Is this your version of show me the money?
This is my version of just making sure that everybody's clear what actually is the alternative spending track that the Labor Party are proposing. So I think they do need to make sure they show us the money.
Did you time this specifically to come right before the second debate?
No, I timed this because we were ready to do it as of yesterday, and we thought you'd rather come in on Monday than Sunday. Although that's an assumption.
What do you say to people that would say that you should spend more time talking about your own policies and less talk about Labor?
Well, I think we're doing a lot of that. If you look, we're announcing a significant policy every day, which is getting, I'd say, good coverage actually from the media and from social media. So to suggest that we're not doing that would be, I think, a major exaggeration. But it's also important that the parties critique each other's positions as well for the public. And I think the New Zealand public needs to be aware of the size of the additional spending that Labor are proposing and the impact that will have on the level of debt in the New Zealand economy, and therefore, by extension, New Zealand households as well, particularly on interest rates over the medium term. This is significant. You can't go from $60 billion to $80 billion worth of debt and not have a significant impact.
Just on the multinational taxation,
Yes.
doesn't Labor think that they are going to get more revenue than nationals?
Yes, but they are incorrect because they've based it on the prediction by Treasury and the IRD that there was $300 million a year in additional base erosion, multinational tax, and that was made up of $200 million of direct taxation and then $100 million for what's known as the Netflix tax. Well, the so-called Netflix tax is in place, and that revenue is flowing through into inland revenue, which leaves $200 million. $100 million was provided for in the government's budget, in budget 2017, and another $100 million was put in by Treasury on its own initiative in the pre-election fiscal update, and it noted it clearly in the pre-election fiscal update. So that's the 300.
Are you effectively claiming that Labor's going to be adding as much spending each year as they're promising this year? I mean, the alternative is they don't need to announce so many new initiatives. Just because they will need some money doesn't mean they'll need 9.4 billion worth.
Well, they have declared that that's their operating allowances, and they've declared it in page 4 of their document that their operating allowances that they've set aside, and they've declared them as their operating allowances in the normal course of the word, which is that's the amount that they've set aside for extra spending in each year. And so the alternative is that they're saying no, actually, because if you look at the track that they've got themselves on the operating allowances, they say it's 900 in the current financial year, dropping back to 800 and something the following year and 800 the year after that. So they're basically saying that that would then decline, and there's no new spending over those next 2 budgets in any other area besides the ones that they've outlined, which are basically health and education and their families package. And the reality of government is that that is just simply not the case. There's generally about $1 billion or so of additional expenditure outside of education and health that just has to be done over the, as in the course of doing government. And in the past, when we've been able to achieve nil increases, is because we've been able to sell assets such as the MOM program and other things. Well, Labor aren't proposing any of that, so there's no way they have spare revenue hiding around to put against this stuff, unless they're going to talk about doing those taxes that they don't want to talk about. That would be the only other option. You either increase taxes or you increase debt.
Isn't there a role though here for some sort of congressional budget office or, UK-style parliamentary budgeting service that analyses the 2 policy packages of both sides after the before the election, so that we don't get into a he said, she said?
Well, that's a possibility, but truly these are not hard things for somebody of, say, for example, your own skills to be able to find, given the time to do it. I mean, these are not, this is a 3-page spreadsheet, more or less. So yes, we could throw up our hands and say we need somebody independent to do it, or we could just get our calculators out and check whether it's there or not. Because these are quite elementary things. The paid parental leave is either in the document or it's not, and they should be able to point to where it is. And they're basically saying, yes, it's in there, but we can't point to it.
The operating allowance, though, is there any chance that this is a presentational issue? That it's
No,
not
I've
in there, or
checked
you've
that.
missed it, or
No,
it was
checked
just
it.
left out?
I've checked it, because the only other place it could be is on page 16 of their forecast, where you go through their expenditures, including Labor's investments, and it's not included there. The operating allowances are in the same as they are on page 14.
Vernon's right. I mean, you're saying that Labor's got their numbers wrong. They might say they've got their numbers right. Why isn't there an independent parliamentary budget office to do the numbers?
Well, all I can say to you is, in the places where those have been hotly debated as well. But it's really straightforward. This is very straightforward. There are 4 things here that are either right or they're not right, and I don't think it's that hard for people to go and have a look. And if they're wrong, then they either have to pull back their spending, redo their numbers, or accept that they're going to be, their level of debt is going to be $20 billion higher. These are the only choices that are out there.
Wouldn't it be a better look, though, to have an independent body saying that rather than you as the National Party saying it?
Well,
Do you
I
think
think
voters
in the
will
New
show
Zealand
that?
in the New Zealand context, we have a context of ideas and a context of policies, and as I say, the number of differences here is not that high. The overall quality of both documents is easy enough to follow. It's just that there are some things missing, and they just need to address those things.
Considering this is quite elementary,
Sorry?
how many hours do you think you put into putting this together?
You mean me personally?
Yeah, your team.
Oh, I'm not sure
How many
actually.
hours?
I literally don't know, but we've spent, they've probably each spent a couple of days on it across 3 or 4 people just to get it right. It was easy to find the thing, but then to check.
How chuffed were you to find this hole?
Well, no, it's not so much how you feel about it. I just think it's really important that these things be laid out properly and explained. I've actually raised the issue of operating allowances and the issue of the paid parental leave when their numbers first came out. It's important, I believe, that they be addressed, because we know that Labor will spend more, and borrow more and tax more than National. That's just the nature of that organisation, that Labor Party. And I think the public are entitled to know before they cast a vote, starting next week, what those numbers actually are. Now, if Labor say that it's completely wrong, well then they should be clear about why it's completely wrong. But certainly I've had a close examination of it with the team here, and I think there's only two explanations. One is they are absolutely planning on starving expenditure beyond their policy commitments over the next 2 years, or they've made a big mistake.
So you're attacking them for having made too many policy commitments. So basically those policy commitments would
well, I would argue
those policy commitments would fit in with what they're saying their debt track is.
No.
But you're saying if you add on an extra billion or so a year.
No, I'm saying that their operating allowance that they have allocated is not allocated correctly.
Okay. But you're saying they'd have no money in 2018-19.
That's correct.
Very little money in
2020-21. They either fix the operating allowance rollout, or they have no money beyond those things.
This line here about no new money in 2018-2019, very little in 2020-21, that still indicates that your own thoughts are that they could price the current policies that they've announced within their package.
No, they couldn't, because it's just completely unrealistic. As I said, the government ends up spending in the non-health, non-education areas around about $1 billion extra a year because of all the things that came up. I gave you one example, the Ministry of Vulnerable Children, but I give you plenty of others: police wage increases in other parts of the public sector, the other developments in areas like conservation, increased expenditure there.
And you've got
the whole budget bid process involves the allocating of expenditure across all the government departments, agencies and votes, and they have either completely mucked up their operating allowances, or they have not allowed for anything in that course of business, which is also completely unrealistic.
And you're thinking they should be allowing what, 1 billion, 2 billion?
Well, I'm just rolling out the numbers they say are there, which are not there.
But how much would you expect, say, for your own budgets?
Well, I can tell you, it's $1.7 billion in new spend each year, rising to about 1.8, and it's $17 billion. $70 billion in new money over a 4-year period. It's all in the pre-election fiscal update. They were already going significantly beyond that, and now they're going, in effect, 12 billion beyond that again. And the reason for that is if you look at their tertiary policy, their education policy, and other policies that they're proposing to lay out, they already add to a lot of additional expenditure. And then on top of that, they did say these are the allowances to cover for everything else. Only the way they have set them up, they don't.
But what we're saying now is that you're arguing just that those allowances don't exist, that they are using the 1.7 billion each year, 1.8 billion each year.
They're using a lot more than that. A lot more than that.
Well, you're saying that they'll still have a little bit of room in 2020-21.
Well, no, all I'm saying is the only possible alternative explanation, which I don't believe, by the way, is that they are literally going to spend no more money over a 2-year period. That's just completely unrealistic. As somebody who's been involved in the presentation of budgets for the last 9 years, that would be what I would call cloud cuckoo land.
I'll just change track slightly.
Sure.
But you guys always object to Labor saying they're going to spend $8 billion more than National in health over 4 years.
That's right.
And you say that's not true.
That's correct.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, what they're basically saying is they're saying this is our health rollout, and you see their numbers there, and they are saying that would happen, and they're comparing that with a government that would never add another dollar again. So they're basically comparing their 4-year incremental increase in health expenditure with the health expenditure it is today, and saying no more money will ever go into it again under a national government. And yet we both know that that's not the case. The biggest incremental amount each year is health. and that National's health spend will go up in subsequent years as well. To suggest that there's an $8 billion extra health is disingenuous and actually a little bit sort of student politics, if I may say, because the reality of it is that everybody knows that that increase goes every year, and in fact the amount we added to health in this last year is more than they're proposing for additional expenditure in each of the next 4 years.